For years, the abandoned mansion at the edge of town had been a source of mystery and intrigue. Some said that it was cursed, while others claimed that it was haunted by the spirits of its former occupants. But when a group of friends decided to explore the mansion one Halloween night, they thought that it was all just superstition. They were brave and bold, and they didn't believe in ghosts or curses. As they made their way through the creaky old mansion, they started to feel a sense of unease. The air was heavy with a feeling of dread, and each room seemed darker and more foreboding than the last. And then they saw it. A figure standing at the end of the hallway, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The friends froze in terror, unable to move as the figure slowly made its way towards them. But as it got closer, they realized that it wasn't a ghost or a monster at all. It was a man, dressed in a long black coat and a top hat. The man introduced himself as the owner of the mansion, and explained that he had been living in hiding there for years. He had been wrongly accused of a terrible crime, and had been forced to flee into hiding to avoid arrest. The friends listened in amazement as the man told his story. They couldn't believe that they had stumbled upon such a secret, hidden away from the world. But just as they were about to leave, the man turned to them with a warning. "You must never speak of what you have seen here tonight," he said. "If you do, the consequences will be dire." The friends nodded solemnly, promising to keep the man's secret. And as they made their way back to the safety of their own homes, they couldn't help but wonder what other secrets lay hidden in the darkness, waiting to be discovered. Maggie had always been afraid of the dark. As a child, she would cling to her nightlight, refusing to close her eyes until she was sure that everything was safe. But as she grew older, Maggie tried to overcome her fear. She knew that it was irrational and that she needed to face it head-on if she wanted to move past it. One night, Maggie was home alone, sitting in the living room watching TV. The power went out suddenly, leaving her in total darkness. Maggie's heart raced as she sat there, paralyzed with fear. She knew that she had to get up and find a flashlight, but the darkness was too overwhelming. Just then, she heard a strange noise coming from the hallway. It was a soft scratching sound, like something was trying to claw its way into the house. Maggie's fear turned to panic as she realized that she was not alone. She stumbled in the darkness, trying to find something to defend herself with. But as she groped around, her hand closed around something cold and metallic. She pulled it out, her heart racing in her chest, and flicked the switch. And that's when she saw it. The creature that had been lurking in the shadows wasn't a monster or a ghost. It was a cat, who had been scratching at the door, trying to get back inside. Maggie let out a deep sigh of relief and laughed at her own fear. She knew that she had been silly, but sometimes it's the smallest things that can set us off. From that day on, Maggie felt a renewed sense of bravery. She knew that she could handle anything, as long as she had the right perspective. Lucy had always been a curious child, so when she heard about a secret room in her house, she knew that she had to find it. She searched high and low, but no matter where she looked, she couldn't find any hidden doors or secret passages. But Lucy didn't give up. She was determined to find the room, no matter how long it took. One day, Lucy was playing in the attic when she noticed a small door that she had never seen before. It was tucked away in the corner, behind some boxes and old clothes. Lucy's heart raced as she approached the door. She could feel a sense of excitement building within her, and she knew that she was about to uncover something amazing. With trembling hands, Lucy pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room was dark, but she could see the outlines of a bed and a dresser. She couldn't believe her luck. She had finally found the secret room. But as Lucy's eyes adjusted to the darkness, She started to notice something strange about the room. The bed was unmade, and the dresser was covered in dust. It was like no one had been in the room for years. And then she saw it. The figure standing in the corner, its back to her. Lucy gasped in horror as she realized what she was looking at. It was a ghost, a specter haunting her house for years. And just as she thought that it was the end, the ghost turned around. Lucy couldn't believe what she saw. The ghost wasn't scary or malevolent. In fact, it was her great-great-grandmother, smiling at her with love and kindness. Lucy was filled with a sense of wonder and awe. She had always felt a connection to her ancestors, and now she knew that they were watching over her, even in death. From that day on, Lucy felt like she had a guardian angel, someone to guide her and protect her no matter where she went. Olivia had always been fascinated by abandoned buildings. There was something about the decay and the emptiness that drew her in, and she loved exploring the forgotten corners of the city. One day, Olivia came across an old abandoned hospital on the outskirts of town. It was a massive building, with broken windows and vines growing up the sides. She knew that she had to explore it. As she entered the hospital, Olivia felt a chill run down her spine. The air was stale and musty, and the silence was deafening. But she pushed on, eager to see what lay ahead. As she walked deeper into the hospital, Olivia heard a faint sound coming from down the hall. It was a strange scraping noise, like something being dragged across the floor. Olivia followed the sound, her heart pounding in her chest. She turned a corner and saw something that made her blood run cold. There, in front of her, was a figure hunched over, dragging a heavy object behind it. Olivia couldn't tell what it was, but it looked like a body wrapped in a sheet. She tried to back away quietly, but it was too late. The figure heard her and turned around. Olivia gasped in horror when she saw its face. It was twisted and contorted, with eyes that glowed in the darkness. Olivia tried to run, but the figure was too fast. It chased her down the hall, its breath hot on her neck. Just as she thought that it was the end, Olivia tripped and fell, hitting her head on the ground. When she came to, she was in a hospital bed. Her friends and family were gathered around her, looking relieved but also horrified. It was then that Olivia realized the shocking truth. The hospital she had been exploring wasn't abandoned at all, it was an active mental institution. The figure she had seen was a patient who had escaped and was dragging a mop bucket behind them, not a body wrapped in a sheet. Olivia felt a wave of relief wash over her, but also a sense of guilt. She had invaded the privacy of the hospital and had inadvertently caused panic and chaos. From that day on, Olivia vowed to respect the boundaries of others and to never again venture where she wasn't supposed to be. Maggie had always loved going on hikes. She loved the fresh air, the beautiful scenery, and the feeling of being one with nature. So when she heard about a secluded hiking trail deep in the woods, she knew she had to check it out. As she hiked deeper and deeper into the woods, Maggie felt a sense of peace wash over her. She breathed in the scent of pine trees and listened to the birds chirping in the distance. But as she walked, she began to realize that something wasn't quite right. The trail was getting narrower and more overgrown, and the trees were getting taller and more ominous. Maggie started to feel like she was being watched, like there was someone or something following her. Just as she was about to turn back, Maggie heard a voice. It was a woman's voice, soft and gentle. She sounded lost and scared, and Maggie knew that she had to help her. She followed the voice deeper into the woods, until she came to a clearing. There, in the center of the clearing, stood a woman. She was beautiful, with long flowing hair and piercing green eyes. She was wearing a long white dress, and she looked like something out of a fairy tale. Maggie approached the woman, wanting to help her. But as she got closer, Something about the woman seemed off. Her eyes were too bright, her smile too wide. Suddenly, Maggie realized a horrifying truth. The woman wasn't lost, she was a spirit, a ghost haunting the woods. And just as Maggie realized this, the woman's face twisted into a mask of pure evil. Her eyes turned black, and her smile became a sneer. Maggie tried to run, but it was too late. The ghostly woman grabbed her, dragging her into the woods. And as Maggie was pulled deeper and deeper into the darkness, she knew that she would never be able to escape. But then, just when all seemed lost, something amazing happened. The ghostly woman vanished, and Maggie found herself standing in the middle of a beautiful garden. The sun was shining, and the birds were singing. Maggie realized with relief that she had been rescued by the spirit of the forest, who had saved her from the evil ghost. Emma had always been afraid of the old abandoned house at the edge of town. It was rumored to be haunted, and no one ever dared to go near it. But one day, Emma's curiosity got the best of her, and she decided to investigate. As she approached the house, Emma felt a chill run down her spine. The windows were boarded up, and the roof was caving in. It looked like it had been lived in for years. Emma hesitated for a moment, but then she took a deep breath and pushed open the door. It creaked ominously on its hinges, and Emma felt a shiver go through her body. The interior of the house was even more eerie than the exterior. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and the air was thick with dust. Emma walked slowly through the rooms, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that was creeping over her. But then, she heard a sound. It was a faint scratching, coming from somewhere deep within the house. Emma froze, not sure what to do. But her curiosity got the best of her, and she followed the sound. It led her down a dark hallway, and finally to a door at the end. Emma pushed it open, and what she saw made her heart stop. There was a person lying on the floor, their body twisted and contorted. Emma couldn't tell if they were dead or alive. She tried to turn and run, but it was too late. The person on the floor suddenly sat up, their eyes glowing with a sinister light. It was then that Emma realized the horrifying truth. The person on the floor wasn't a victim, they were a monster. The abandoned house wasn't haunted, it was the monster's lair. Emma tried to run, but the monster was too fast. It cornered her, its eyes glowing brighter and brighter. Just when Emma thought that it was the end, she woke up, realizing that it was all just a nightmare. But then she saw something that made her blood run cold. There was a scratch on her arm, as if something had grabbed her in her sleep. Emma realized with a sinking feeling that the nightmare might not be over after all. It was a dark and stormy night, and Emily was driving home from a late shift at work. The rain was coming down in sheets, making it nearly impossible to see the road ahead. Emily was nervous, but she knew that she had to keep going. As she drove, Emily noticed something strange. A car was following her, tailing her closely. She tried to shake it off, but the car kept following her, no matter how fast or slow she drove. Finally, Emily couldn't take it anymore. She pulled over to the side of the road, hoping that the car would pass her by. But when she looked in her rearview mirror, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The car behind her was empty. There was no driver, no passengers, nothing. It was as if the car was driving itself. Panicked, Emily tried to start her car, but it wouldn't budge. She was trapped, alone on a dark and deserted road with the ghost car following her every move. Suddenly, Emily heard a voice behind her. It was a man's voice, deep and ominous. He told her that he had been in a car accident on this road years ago, and that he had been stuck here ever since. He wanted Emily to help him find his way out. Emily was terrified, but she also felt a pang of sympathy for the ghostly driver. She agreed to help him, not sure what else to do. As she followed his instructions, Emily started to feel like she was going in circles. She couldn't see anything through the rain, and she was lost and disoriented. Finally, the voice spoke again. This time, it told Emily to stop and get out of her car. She obeyed, stepping out into the pouring rain. And that's when she saw the truth. The ghostly driver was real, but he wasn't a man. He was a monster, a hideous creature with glowing red eyes and razor-sharp teeth. Emily realized too late that she had been lured into a trap. The ghostly driver wasn't looking for a way out, he was looking for his next victim. Emily tried to run, but it was too late. The creature caught up to her, and she knew that she would never escape. Laura was always afraid of the dark. As a child, she would hide under the covers, too scared to even look outside the window at night. As an adult, she had managed to conquer her fear, or so she thought. One night, Laura was alone in her apartment, watching TV. As the night wore on, she noticed that the lights were flickering. She tried to ignore it, but it was impossible. The flickering grew more and more frequent, until finally, the lights went out completely. Laura was plunged into darkness. She tried to find her phone to use as a flashlight, but she couldn't find it. She fumbled around in the dark, her heart pounding in her chest. Suddenly, Laura heard a faint noise. It was a scratching sound, like something was trying to get in through the window. Laura froze, too scared to move. The scratching grew louder, more insistent. Finally, Laura summoned up the courage to get out of bed and investigate. She walked over to the window and peered out into the darkness. But what she saw made her blood run cold. There was a figure standing outside, its eyes glowing in the darkness. Laura couldn't make out any features, but she knew that it wasn't human. It was something else entirely. Terrified, Laura backed away from the window, not sure what to do. Suddenly, she heard a loud crash, like something had broken through the window. Laura screamed and ran to the door, hoping to escape before the creature could get in. But when she opened the door, she was shocked to see her ex-boyfriend standing there. He had broken into her apartment, determined to win her back. Laura was furious, but also relieved. At least it wasn't a monster outside her window. Laura and her ex-boyfriend argued, and she finally managed to get him to leave. As she locked the door behind him, Laura felt a sense of relief wash over her. She was safe, and the nightmare was over. But as she turned around to head back to bed, she saw something that made her heart stop. The creature was still there, its eyes glowing in the darkness. And this time, it was inside her apartment. Rachel had always loved her family's cabin in the woods. It was a quiet and peaceful place, surrounded by nature, and it was the perfect escape from the chaos of everyday life. But this time, something felt off. As Rachel settled into bed, she heard strange noises outside. It sounded like someone was moving around the cabin. She tried to convince herself that it was just the wind, but the noises grew louder and more persistent. Finally, Rachel got out of bed and walked over to the window. Outside, she saw a shadowy figure moving around the cabin. She couldn't make out any features, but she knew that someone was out there. Panicked, Rachel ran to the door and locked it, hoping to keep the intruder out. She called the police, but they were too far away to arrive quickly. Rachel felt trapped and helpless. Suddenly, she heard a loud knock at the door. She froze, unsure of what to do. The knocking continued, growing louder and more insistent. Rachel mustered up the courage to look through the peephole, but all she saw was darkness. She unlocked the door and slowly opened it, ready to confront the intruder. But when she opened the door, she was shocked to see her long-lost sister standing there. Rachel couldn't believe it. Her sister had disappeared years ago. and everyone had assumed that she was dead. But now, here she was, standing on the doorstep of their family's cabin. Rachel was overjoyed to see her sister, but as they talked, she noticed something strange. Her sister seemed distant and aloof, almost as if she didn't recognize Rachel at all. Rachel tried to shake it off, but the feeling of unease lingered. As the night wore on, Rachel noticed more and more odd things about her sister. She didn't eat or drink anything, and she didn't seem to feel the cold, despite the chilly temperatures outside. Eventually, Rachel couldn't take it anymore. She confronted her sister, demanding to know what was going on. And that's when her sister revealed the truth. She wasn't really Rachel's sister. She was a shape-shifting creature, sent to lure Rachel out of the cabin and into the woods, where she would be devoured. The noises that Rachel heard outside were the sounds of the creature transforming, getting ready to attack. Rachel was horrified. She had almost fallen for the creature's trap. She knew that she had to act fast if she wanted to survive. With all of her might, Rachel fought against the creature, trying to push it out of the cabin. After a long and difficult struggle, Rachel finally succeeded in getting the creature out of the cabin. But as she looked out the window, she saw that there were more of them, lurking in the darkness. Rachel knew that she had to leave the cabin and run for her life. She grabbed her coat and fled into the woods, hoping to outrun the creatures that were chasing her. As she ran, Rachel realized that she might never make it out alive. But she also knew that she would never give up without a fight. It was a dark and stormy night. Mary had just moved into her new house in the countryside. Despite the howling wind and the rain tapping against the windows, Mary felt a sense of peace as she sat by the fireplace, sipping hot cocoa. As she sat there, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She looked around her room, but no one was there. Suddenly, she heard a creaking sound coming from upstairs. She tried to ignore it, but the sound grew louder and closer. With trembling hands, Mary slowly made her way up the stairs. The creaking sound grew louder with every step. Finally, she reached the top of the stairs and saw a door at the end of the hallway. It was slightly ajar, and a faint light was shining through the crack. Mary pushed the door open and gasped in horror at what she saw. There, standing in the middle of the room, was a ghostly figure. It was the ghost of a woman who had been murdered in the house years ago. The ghostly figure floated towards Mary, and as it did, Mary noticed something strange. The ghost was wearing a locket, and inside the locket was a picture of Mary herself. Terrified, Mary tried to run, but the ghostly figure blocked her path. Mary was trapped, face to face with the ghostly figure. The figure spoke, its voice cold and menacing. "You shouldn't have come here," it said. "This is my house, and now it's yours too." Suddenly, the ghostly figure vanished, leaving Mary alone in the room. She looked down at the locket on the floor and picked it up. As she examined it, she saw that it wasn't a locket at all. It was a tiny camera, and it had been recording her every move. Mary realized that a ghostly figure had been a ploy all along, created to scare her away from the house. But now, whoever had been watching her had all the footage they needed to blackmail her for the rest of her life. Shaken to her core, Mary knew she had made a fatal mistake by moving into the house. She had no choice but to leave, never to return again. Olivia had always been fascinated by the paranormal, so when she heard about a haunted house in the countryside, she knew she had to investigate. She packed her bags and set off on the long journey to the remote location. As she arrived at the house, she felt a sense of unease. The house was old and decrepit, with boarded-up windows and overgrown vegetation surrounding it. She hesitated for a moment, but her curiosity got the best of her. and she approached the front door. As she stepped inside the house, she immediately felt a chill run down her spine. She heard strange noises coming from the walls, and the air felt thick with a sense of foreboding. But Olivia pushed on, determined to uncover the secrets of the house. As she explored the various rooms of the house, she began to notice strange things happening. Objects would move on their own, doors would slam shut, and she felt an eerie presence watching her every move. But Olivia remained undeterred, convinced that the ghosts were trying to communicate with her. One night, as Olivia was sitting in the living room, she felt a cold breeze blow past her. She turned to see a figure standing in the corner of the room, its eyes glowing in the darkness. Olivia was frozen with fear, unable to move as the figure began to move closer and closer. But then, something even more shocking happened. The figure stepped into the light, revealing itself to be not a ghost, but a person. The person was a scientist, who had been conducting experiments in the house for years, using the ghost stories as a cover-up for his work. The scientist explained to Olivia that he had been working on a device that could manipulate the physical world, allowing him to move objects with his mind. He had been using the rumors of the haunted house to keep people away, so that he could continue his research undisturbed. Olivia was stunned, realizing that the ghostly activity she had experienced had all been the result of the scientist's experiments. But then, the scientist offered her a proposition. He said that he could use his device to help her communicate with the dead, to unlock the secrets of the afterlife. Olivia was tempted, but then she realized the true horror of the situation. The scientist's experiments had gone on too far, and he was no longer able to distinguish between right and wrong. She knew that if she stayed in the house, she would be trapped forever, a pawn in the scientist's twisted game. So, she fled the house, vowing never to return. Jenna had always been an animal lover, so when she saw an ad for a dog adoption event at a local shelter, she knew she had to go. As she walked through the rows of cages, she saw many adorable dogs vying for her attention. But there was one dog in particular that caught her eye. The dog was a large, scruffy mutt with a friendly face and bright eyes. Jenna approached the cage and the dog immediately licked her hand, as if to say hello. Jenna knew she had found the perfect companion, and she eagerly signed the adoption papers. As she drove the dog home, she couldn't help but feel that something was off. The dog seemed to be staring at her in a strange way, almost as if it knew something she didn't. But Jenna dismissed the feeling as her imagination and settled in with her new furry friend. Over the next few days, Jenna noticed that the dog was always watching her, even when she slept. She began to feel uneasy, as if the dog was studying her every move. She even started to suspect that the dog might be a little too intelligent for a regular pet. One night, as Jenna was getting ready for bed, she heard a strange noise coming from the living room. She cautiously made her way into the room and saw the dog standing on its hind legs, pawing at the door. Jenna was shocked, as she had never seen a dog stand up like that before. But then, the dog did something even more shocking. It spoke. The dog looked at Jenna and said, "I know you, Jenna. I've been waiting for you." Jenna was stunned, unable to believe what she was hearing. The dog continued, "I'm not really a dog. I'm a scientist, who has been conducting an experiment on canine intelligence. And I've chosen you to help me continue my work." Jenna was terrified, realizing that the dog she had adopted was not a dog at all, but a genetically modified creature designed to mimic the behavior of a dog. And now, she was trapped with this intelligent creature, unsure of what it was capable of doing next. Sophie had always been fascinated by the abandoned amusement park on the outskirts of town. She had heard stories of the park's dark past, of accidents and tragedies that had befallen the visitors who had dared to ride the old attractions. But Sophie was fearless, and she decided to explore the park for herself. As she wandered through the rusted gates and past the old rides, she felt a sense of excitement mixed with fear. She was alone in the park, but she felt as though she was being watched. As she reached the roller coaster, she felt a sudden urge to ride it, to feel the rush of wind through her hair and the thrill of the drops and turns. She climbed aboard the coaster and felt the seat belt snap into place. The ride began, slowly at first, but then picking up speed as it climbed higher and higher. Sophie felt a sense of exhilaration as the coaster raced down the first hill, but then she felt something strange. The coaster seemed to be going faster than it should, hurtling down the tracks at breakneck speed. As the coaster reached the top of the hill, Sophie realized a horrifying truth. The coaster had malfunctioned, and she was trapped on it, hurtling towards certain death. She closed her eyes and braced herself for impact. But then, something even more shocking happened. The coaster suddenly came to a stop, and the lights turned on. Sophie looked around and saw that she was not alone on the coaster. Sitting beside her was a figure she had never seen before, a person who had seemingly materialized out of thin air. The figure turned to Sophie and revealed the truth. He was a ghost, one of the many spirits who haunted the amusement park, seeking revenge on those who had caused their deaths. The coaster had been rigged by the ghosts, hoping to trap Sophie and make her their next victim. Sophie was stunned, but even more shocking was the revelation that the ghost sitting beside her was her own father, who had died in an accident at the amusement park years ago. He had returned as a vengeful spirit, hoping to lure Sophie into his trap and make her suffer the same fate he had. Samantha had always been fascinated by the old mansion at the end of the street. The house had stood empty for as long as she could remember, and she had always wondered what secrets it held. One day, Samantha decided to explore the house for herself. She sneaked into the house through a broken window and began to explore the old rooms. As she made her way through the dusty corridors, she noticed that the house was filled with old paintings and antique furniture. But as she walked through the rooms, Samantha began to feel a strange presence watching her. She felt as though she was not alone, and that someone, or something, was following her every move. As she reached the end of the hallway, she saw a door that was slightly ajar. She pushed it open and gasped in horror at what she saw. Inside the room was a young girl, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, sitting at a desk and writing in a journal. The girl looked up and smiled at Samantha, introducing herself as Emily. Samantha was stunned, as she had never seen anyone else in the house before. As the two girls talked, Samantha realized that Emily was not just any ordinary girl. She was a ghost, trapped in the house for over 100 years, unable to leave until she could solve the mystery of her own death. Samantha promised to help Emily, and together they searched the house for clues. As they pieced together the fragments of the past, they uncovered a shocking truth. Emily had been murdered by her own father, who had hidden her body inside the house to cover up the crime. Samantha was horrified, but even more shocking was the realization that the girl she had been helping all along was not Emily, but the ghost of her own mother. Samantha had been unknowingly helping to solve her own family's dark past, and the ghostly Emily was the key to unlocking the long-buried secrets of her own family. In a small village nestled deep in the woods, there was a house that stood abandoned for many years. The villagers whispered that the house was cursed, and that anyone who entered it would never come out alive. But one day, a group of curious teenagers decided to explore the abandoned house, eager to uncover its secrets. As they crept inside, they felt a chill run down their spines, as if the very air around them was filled with malevolent energy. As they explored the house, they found strange symbols scrawled on the walls, and mysterious artifacts scattered throughout the rooms. But as they reached the attic, they found something that left them frozen in terror. In the corner of the room was a small, old-fashioned television set, the kind that had not been used in years. But as they turned it on, they were shocked to see a video of themselves playing on the screen. The video showed the teenagers exploring the house, and as they watched in horror, they saw themselves being stalked by a shadowy figure that they could not identify. The figure seemed to be watching them from the shadows, waiting for its chance to strike. As the video played on, the teenagers realized the truth. The figure in the shadows was not some supernatural creature or ghost, but one of their own friends, who had been hiding in the house and spying on them the entire time. Feeling betrayed and violated, the teenagers confronted their friend, who revealed that he had been secretly filming them for years, watching their every move and waiting for the right moment to strike. The revelation left the group shattered and traumatized, as they realized that the real horror had been lurking within themselves all along. The abandoned house was not cursed, but it had revealed a much darker truth about their own human nature. In a small town by the sea, there was a lighthouse that had been guiding ships to safety for over a century. The lighthouse keeper, an old man named George, had been tending to the light for as long as anyone could remember. One night, a violent storm swept over the town, and the waves grew so high that they threatened to engulf the lighthouse. George climbed the stairs to the top of the tower and tended to the light, as he had done so many times before. As the storm raged on, George heard a knock on the door. He opened it to find a young woman standing outside, drenched from the rain and shivering with cold. She begged him to let her in and offered to help tend to the light. George hesitated at first, but he saw the desperation in the woman's eyes and decided to let her in. As they worked together to keep the light burning, George couldn't help but notice that the woman seemed familiar. As the storm passed and the sun rose over the horizon, George finally recognized the woman's face. She was his daughter, who had disappeared many years ago and was presumed dead. Overwhelmed with emotion, George embraced his daughter, and they both cried tears of joy. But as they talked, George began to notice that something was off about his daughter. Her eyes were hollow, and her skin was cold to the touch. As the day went on, George realized the truth. The woman who had appeared on his doorstep was not his daughter, but a ghost who had been haunting the lighthouse for years, waiting for someone to let her in. George was filled with horror and regret for the mistake he had made. He had unknowingly welcomed a ghost into the lighthouse, and he had put himself and his daughter's spirit in danger. As the sun set over the horizon, the ghostly woman disappeared into the night, leaving George alone with his guilt and his memories. From that day on, George never opened the door to strangers again, knowing that the consequences of his actions could be far more terrifying than he ever imagined. In a small, isolated village in the mountains, there was a legend of a mysterious creature that lurked in the nearby forest. The villagers warned their children to stay away from the forest, and no one dared to venture too close. One day, a group of adventurous hikers decided to explore the forest, despite the warnings of the villagers. As they trekked deeper into the woods, they began to hear strange noises and felt an eerie presence all around them. As they reached a clearing, they saw a figure in the distance. It was a creature with the body of a man and the head of a wolf. The hikers froze in terror as the creature slowly approached them. But as the creature drew closer, they noticed something strange. Its fur was matted and dirty, and it had a desperate look in its eyes. The hikers realized that the creature was not a monster but a man who had been living in the forest for years. trying to survive on his own. Feeling sorry for the man, the hikers decided to take him back to the village and help him reintegrate into society. They cleaned him up, gave him clothes, and introduced him to the villagers. The man, whose name was Simon, was welcomed into the village with open arms. He was given a job at the local lumber mill and quickly became a beloved member of the community. But as time went on, strange things began to happen in the village. People started to go missing, and there were reports of strange howling noises coming from the forest at night. The villagers began to suspect that Simon was not as he seemed, and they accused him of being the culprit behind the disappearances. Simon denied the accusations, but the villagers were convinced that he was responsible for the crimes. One night, a group of villagers decided to take matters into their own hands and confront Simon in his home. But as they burst into his cabin, they were shocked to find something they could never have imagined. Simon was not the creature they had feared, nor was he responsible for the disappearances. In fact, he had been trying to protect the village from a pack of feral wolves that had been attacking people at night. The villagers were filled with guilt and shame for their hasty accusations, and they realized that they had been the ones to create a monster they had feared all along. From that day on, they welcomed Simon back into the village with open arms, grateful for the kindness and bravery he had shown them. In a small town in the countryside, there was a grand old mansion that had been abandoned for years. It was said that the house was cursed, and no one who entered ever returned. One day, a group of friends decided to investigate the abandoned mansion, just for the thrill of it. They arrived at the overgrown property and found a way inside. As they walked through the dusty halls, they felt an eerie presence all around them. As they explored the mansion, they stumbled upon a secret room that had been hidden behind a bookcase. The room was filled with strange artifacts and mysterious symbols etched into the walls. One of the friends, a young woman named Lily, was drawn to a small statue that seemed to emanate a strange energy. As she reached out to touch the statue, the room suddenly grew colder, and the door slammed shut behind them. The friends tried to open the door, but it was stuck fast. As they looked around the room for another way out, they noticed that the symbols on the wall were glowing faintly. Suddenly, the statue began to levitate, and the symbols on the walls grew brighter. The friends tried to run, but they were frozen in place by some unseen force. As they watched in horror, the statue exploded, and a cloud of smoke filled the room. When the smoke cleared, the friends found themselves in a completely different place. They were no longer in the abandoned mansion but in a strange laboratories filled with futuristic equipment. As they stumbled around, trying to make sense of what had happened, they were confronted by a group of scientists in white lab coats. The scientists explained that they had been part of a top-secret experiment to test the effects of teleportation on the human body. Lily realized that the curse of the mansion had been an elaborate cover-up for the experiment, and they had unknowingly become test subjects. But as the scientists prepared to send them back, Lily noticed something strange. One of the scientists was wearing a necklace with the same mysterious symbol as the one in the secret room. With a sudden burst of clarity, Lily realized that the experiment was not what it seemed. The scientists were not testing the effects of teleportation but were trying to harness the power of the mysterious statue to create a new form of energy. Lily and her friends knew they had to stop the scientists and destroy the dangerous technology before it was too late. With the help of some unlikely allies, they were able to escape the laboratories and destroy the machine. As they emerged into the bright sunlight, Lily realized that the curse of the mansion had been lifted, and she and her friends had become unwitting heroes in a dangerous game of science and power. In a small town in the middle of nowhere, There was an old abandoned asylum that had been closed down for decades. It was said that the spirits of the patients who had died there still haunted the building, and no one dared to go near it. One day, a group of friends decided to explore the abandoned asylum, just for the thrill of it. They arrived at the dilapidated building and found a way inside. As they walked through the halls, they heard strange noises coming from the rooms and felt an eerie presence all around them. As they entered a particularly dark and creepy room, they found an old journal lying on the floor. Curious, they picked it up and began to read it. The journal was written by one of the patients who had been locked up in the asylum many years ago. It was filled with terrifying stories of abuse and neglect, and the writer had clearly been driven to madness by their experiences. Suddenly, they heard footsteps approaching, and they hid in the shadows. But it wasn't a ghostly figure that appeared, it was a man dressed in a security guard uniform. He asked them what they were doing there and told them that the asylum was now being used as a storage facility for a nearby company. Feeling relieved that they weren't in danger, the group of friends thanked the security guard and began to leave. But as they turned to go, they saw something that made their blood run cold. Through a crack in the wall, they could see a room filled with medical equipment and restraints, and there were people lying on the beds, clearly in distress. Realizing that the asylum was still being used to conduct secret experiments on people, the group of friends knew they had to do something. They went to the police and showed them the evidence, and an investigation was launched. But as the police raided the building, they found something even more shocking than they could have ever imagined. The security guard was not a guard at all, but a mad scientist who had been conducting illegal experiments on innocent people for years. He had been using the abandoned asylum as a cover for his horrific work, and the company that supposedly used the building for storage was actually a front for his experiments. The group of friends had unknowingly stumbled upon one of the biggest criminal operations in the town's history, and their bravery had brought it to an end. But the trauma of what they had witnessed would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Once upon a time, in a small town nestled in the forest, there was a house on the hill that everyone in the town avoided. It was said that strange things happened in the house, and no one who entered ever returned. One day, a group of teenagers dared each other to spend the night in the house, and one brave soul named Sarah volunteered. As she settled into the creaky old bed, she heard strange noises coming from the attic. Cautiously, she climbed the stairs to investigate. As she reached the top of the stairs, she was confronted by a terrifying ghostly figure. She screamed and turned to run, but the door slammed shut behind her, trapping her inside. Sarah tried desperately to escape, but the ghostly figure was relentless in its pursuit. As she backed away, she felt her hand brush against a hidden lever on the wall. In desperation, she pulled it, and the wall behind her slid open to reveal a hidden passageway. Sarah ran through the passageway, with the ghostly figure hot on her heels. But as she emerged on the other side, she was shocked to find herself standing in high-tech laboratories filled with computer screens and scientific equipment. As the ghostly figure appeared once again, Sarah realized that it was not a ghost at all, but a highly advanced hologram. She turned to face the scientist who had been controlling it all along and demanded an explanation. The scientist revealed that the house on the hill was actually a top-secret research facility, and the hologram was part of an experiment to test the human response to fear. Sarah had unknowingly become a part of the experiment, and her reaction had exceeded all expectations. But as Sarah tried to make sense of it all, she heard a loud explosion coming from the laboratories. The scientist had accidentally triggered a catastrophic chain reaction, and the entire facility was about to be destroyed. Sarah had to act fast. She sprinted through the laboratories, dodging debris and avoiding flames, until she reached the emergency exit. With seconds to spare, she burst through the door and tumbled out onto the grass outside. As she looked back at the burning laboratories, Sarah realized that the terrifying experience she had just been through was all a carefully orchestrated illusion. And with a heavy heart, she wondered how many other innocent people had been unknowingly subjected to the same experiment. Leela had always been curious about the old abandoned hospital on the outskirts of town. The hospital had been closed for years, and the rumors surrounding its closure were dark and mysterious. Leela's curiosity got the best of her, and she decided to explore the hospital on her own. As she entered the hospital, she felt a sense of unease. The walls were covered in peeling paint, and the floors creaked under her feet. She made her way down the hallways, peering into empty rooms, searching for clues about the hospital's past. As she entered one of the rooms, she felt a cold breeze blow past her. She shivered and wrapped her arms around herself, trying to keep warm. Suddenly, she heard a voice behind her. "Get out." Leela turned around, but there was no one there. She felt a chill run down her spine, but she ignored it and continued exploring the hospital. As she made her way deeper into the hospital, she began to feel like she was being watched. She heard strange noises and saw things moving out of the corner of her eye. She started to feel like someone or something was following her. Finally, Leela found herself in the hospital's basement. The air was thick and musty, and she felt like she was suffocating. Suddenly, she heard a voice whisper in her ear, "You shouldn't be here." Leela spun around, but there was no one there. She was starting to get scared, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to stay and find out what was really going on in the abandoned hospital. As she turned to leave the basement, she heard a noise behind her. She turned around and saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was a man, dressed in scrubs, his face obscured by a surgical mask. Leela tried to run, but the man caught her and dragged her into a nearby room. He locked the door behind them, and Leela realized too late that she had made a mistake by coming to the hospital alone. But then, the plot twist, the man was not a crazed killer, but a security guard who had been stationed at the hospital to keep people out. He had been trying to scare Leela away because he knew how dangerous the hospital was. He had saved her from a fate worse than death, but Leela had been too blinded by her curiosity to realize it. Sophie had always been fascinated with the paranormal. She had grown up reading horror stories and watching scary movies, and it was no surprise that she had developed an interest in ghost hunting. One day, Sophie and her friends decided to explore an abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town. The mansion had been abandoned for years, and rumors had it that it was haunted by the ghosts of its former inhabitants. Sophie and her friends arrived at the mansion and began exploring its dusty halls. They were armed with flashlights, cameras, and an EMF meter, ready to capture any evidence of paranormal activity. As they entered one of the bedrooms, Sophie felt a sudden chill run down her spine. She raised her camera and snapped a picture, hoping to capture something on film. When they reviewed the photos later that night, they were shocked to see the image of a woman in the corner of the bedroom. She was dressed in a white gown, and her hair was long and flowing. Excited by their discovery, Sophie and her friends returned to the mansion the next day. As they explored further, They began to experience strange occurrences. Doors would slam shut on their own, and they would hear footsteps when no one was there. Sophie was thrilled. She felt like they were getting closer to the truth, and that the ghosts of the mansion were communicating with them. However, things took a dark turn when one of her friends disappeared. The police were called, and they searched the mansion thoroughly. They found no trace of Sophie's friend, and Sophie was devastated. She felt responsible for her friend's disappearance and vowed to get to the bottom of the paranormal activity in the mansion. Sophie and her remaining friends returned to the mansion once more. They explored every room, looking for any clue that could help them solve the mystery. As they entered the bedroom where they had captured the photo of the ghostly woman, Sophie felt a sudden urge to look behind the bed. To her horror, she found a secret passage that led to a hidden room. Inside the room, they found the remains of Sophie's missing friend. The twist: the ghostly woman in the photo was not a ghost at all. She was the murderer of Sophie's friend, dressed in a white gown to blend in with the ghosts that were rumored to haunt the mansion. The strange occurrences that Sophie and her friends had experienced had been part of the murderer's plan to scare them away and cover up the crime. Sophie had been chasing a ghost when the real danger had been hiding in plain sight. Emily had just moved into a new house with her family. The house was old and creaky, but it had a charm that Emily found appealing. However, as the days went by, Emily began to notice strange things happening. Doors would open and close on their own, and she would hear footsteps when no one was there. Emily tried to ignore the strange occurrences, but they only got worse. One night, she woke up to find a figure standing at the foot of her bed. It was a tall, shadowy figure, and Emily felt a chill run down her spine. Terrified, Emily told her parents about the figure, but they dismissed it as a nightmare. They assured her that there was nothing to be afraid of and that the house was perfectly safe. However, Emily was not convinced. She began to research the history of the house and discovered that it had been built on an ancient burial ground. She became convinced that the figure she had seen was a vengeful spirit, angry that her family had disturbed its resting place. Determined to rid the house of the spirit, Emily contacted a psychic. The psychic arrived and conducted a séance, but nothing seemed to happen. Emily was disappointed but resigned herself to living with the spirit. Days turned into weeks, and the strange occurrences continued. Emily began to feel like she was going crazy, and her parents started to worry about her. They took her to a psychiatrist, who prescribed medication for her anxiety. However, as Emily began to take the medication, the strange occurrences stopped. Emily felt relieved and thought that the medication had cured her of her anxiety. One day, she was cleaning out her closet when she found a small vial of liquid. Curious, she opened it and smelled it. The smell was familiar. It was the same smell as the medication she had been taking. Realization dawned on Emily. The medication had not cured her anxiety, it had been causing the hallucinations all along. The figure she had seen had been a side effect of the medication, and the entire experience had been a delusion. The twist: Emily had actually been suffering from a severe mental illness, and the medication had been prescribed to help her. The figure she had seen had been a hallucination, and the ancient burial ground had been a figment of her imagination. The medication had cured her of her delusions, and the strange occurrences had never actually happened. Samantha had always been a thrill seeker, so when her friends suggested they go on a camping trip in the deep woods, she was all in. They packed their bags and set off into the forest, eager to explore the wilderness and test their survival skills. As they made their way deeper into the woods, they began to notice strange things happening. They heard strange noises at night and saw mysterious figures lurking in the shadows. Samantha tried to convince herself that it was just her imagination, but the feeling of unease persisted. One night, Samantha woke up to find that her friends were gone. She searched the campsite but found no trace of them. She called out their names but received no response. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. Panicked, Samantha started to run through the woods, hoping to find her friends. As she ran, she noticed that the trees in the forest floor began to change. The trees grew darker, the leaves turned brown, and the air grew colder. Samantha realized that she was no longer in the same forest she had entered. Suddenly, she came to a clearing and saw a group of people gathered around a fire. They were all dressed in strange clothing and had a wild look in their eyes. They welcomed Samantha to their group and invited her to join them in their celebration. As the night wore on, Samantha realized that these people were not what they seemed. They were not just camping in the woods, they were part of a strange cult that worshipped a dark deity. Samantha realized that her friends had been lured into the cult and had willingly joined them. Terrified, Samantha tried to run away, but the cult members caught her and brought her before their leader. The leader revealed that Samantha had been chosen as a sacrifice to their dark god, and that her friends had willingly offered her up. Samantha was about to be killed when a group of rangers burst into the clearing and rescued her. She was grateful to be alive, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her friends had betrayed her. The twist? Samantha had actually been the one who had convinced her friends to join the cult. She had been lured in by the thrill of danger and had been the one who had offered up her friends as sacrifices. The entire experience had been a twisted game of manipulation, and Samantha had been the mastermind behind it all. Mark had always been fascinated by abandoned places, so when he heard about an old asylum that had been closed for years, he couldn't resist exploring it. He arrived at the asylum early one morning, camera in hand, and began to explore. The asylum was in a state of disrepair, with broken windows and crumbling walls. Mark took photos of everything, trying to capture the eerie atmosphere of the abandoned building. As he made his way deeper into the asylum, he heard strange noises and felt like he was being watched. Finally, he came to a large room with a strange machine in the center. It looked like some kind of experimental equipment, and Mark couldn't resist taking a closer look. As he examined the machine, he suddenly felt a jolt of electricity and was thrown across the room. When he woke up, he was in a different room, strapped to a bed. The room was cold and sterile, and Mark had no idea how he had got him there. He tried to break free, but the straps held him tight. Suddenly, a group of doctors appeared. They were wearing white lab coats and had a strange, clinical look in their eyes. Mark begged them to let him go, but they ignored him and began to perform strange experiments on him. Days turned into weeks, and Mark lost all sense of time. The doctors continued to experiment on him, subjecting him to unimaginable pain and suffering. Mark was convinced that he would never leave the asylum alive. Finally, one day, the doctors released him from the straps and told him that the experiment was over. Mark was overjoyed and ran out of the asylum as fast as he could. He never looked back. Years passed, and Mark tried to put the experience behind him. However, he was plagued by strange nightmares and felt like he was being watched wherever he went. Eventually, he decided to investigate the asylum further and discovered a shocking truth. The twist? The asylum had never been abandoned, and the doctors who had experimented on Mark were still alive and active. They had deliberately lured him in and used him as a test subject for their twisted experiments. The entire abandoned asylum was a facade designed to attract unsuspecting victims like Mark. Mary had always been a curious child, so when her family moved into a new house that was said to be haunted, she couldn't resist exploring. She spent us wandering the halls, trying to uncover the secrets of the house's past. One day, while exploring the attic, Mary found an old journal. It belonged to a young girl named Emily, who had lived in the house over 100 years ago. Emily had written about strange occurrences in the house and had even claimed to have seen ghosts. Mary became obsessed with Emily's story and spent all her time reading the journal and trying to communicate with the spirits. She even set up a makeshift Ouija board in the attic and attempted to summon the ghosts that Emily had spoken of. At first, nothing happened, but as Mary became more and more desperate to contact the spirits, strange things started to occur. Doors would slam shut by themselves, objects would move on their own, and Mary would hear strange whispers in her ear. Finally, one night, Mary saw a ghostly figure appear in her room. It was the ghost of Emily, and she was angry. She told Mary to leave the house and never come back, warning her that the spirits would not be kind to those who disturbed their rest. Terrified, Mary left the house and never returned. She couldn't stop thinking about Emily's warning and the angry spirits she had encountered. Eventually, she decided to do some research on Emily and the history of the house. To her shock, she discovered that Emily had actually been a notorious prankster in her day, and had made up the entire ghost story to scare her family and friends. Mary realized that she had been played, and that there were no ghosts in the house after all. The twist? Mary was so convinced by the hoax that she had unknowingly caused all the strange occurrences in the house herself, through her own fear and desperation to contact the spirits. The real ghost in this story was Mary herself. There was a small village on the edge of a deep, dark forest. The villagers had always been warned to stay away from the forest, as it was believed to be cursed. However, one day a young girl named Lily wandered into the forest, and she never returned. The villagers searched for her, but they could not find her. Eventually, they gave up and assumed that she was lost forever in the cursed forest. Years passed, and the villagers had forgotten about Lily until one day, a young woman appeared in the village. She claimed to be Lily, all grown up and alive. The villagers were shocked and overjoyed to see her, and they welcomed her back with open arms. However, something was off about Lily. She was quiet and distant, and she never spoke of her time in the forest. The villagers assumed that she had been traumatized by her experience and tried their best to make her feel at home. One night, a group of villagers decided to visit Lily to check on her. When they arrived at her house, they found her sitting at a table, staring blankly ahead. They called out to her, but she did not respond. They approached her and saw that her eyes were completely black. Suddenly, she spoke in a strange, otherworldly voice. "I am not Lily," she said. "I am the spirit that possessed her when she entered the cursed forest. I have been living in her body all these years, waiting for the right moment to reveal myself." The villagers were horrified and tried to flee, but the possessed Lily was too strong. She attacked them one by one, using powers that no human should possess. In the end, the entire village was destroyed, and the cursed forest claimed its latest victims. The twist? The real Lily had died in the forest, and the spirit had taken over her body. The possessed Lily had been the one to return to the village, and the villagers had unknowingly welcomed their own doom into their midst. There was a small town in the middle of nowhere that was plagued by a series of mysterious disappearances. No one knew what was causing them, and everyone was too scared to leave their homes after dark. One night, a group of teenagers decided to investigate the disappearances. They went to the last known location of one of the missing people, an old abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. As they entered the factory, they heard strange noises coming from one of the rooms. As they approached the room, they saw a shadowy figure standing in the corner. They called out, but the figure didn't respond. One of the teenagers, named Sarah, stepped forward to investigate. As she got closer, the figure lunged at her, and she screamed. The other teenagers tried to help, but the figure was too strong. They ran out of the factory and called the police, who searched the area but found no evidence of the shadowy figure or any of the missing people. Weeks passed, and the town was still on edge. No one knew what had happened to the missing people or who was responsible. One day, Sarah's mother received a package in the mail. It was from Sarah, and it contained a video recording of the night of the factory incident. As her mother watched the video, she saw that Sarah had staged the entire thing. She had hired an actor to play the shadowy figure and had faked her own disappearance to get attention. Her mother was shocked and devastated that her own daughter had caused so much panic and fear in the town. When the police found out what had happened, they arrested Sarah for making false claims and wasting their time. The town was left to pick up the pieces and move on from the hoax that had shaken them to their core. The lesson learned was that sometimes, the real danger is closer to home than we think, and the actions we take can have far-reaching consequences that we may not even realize. There was a young couple, Jack and Emily, who had just moved into a new house in a quiet, suburban neighborhood. They were excited to start their new life together and had big plans for their future. One night, as they were unpacking boxes in their living room, they heard a loud banging sound coming from the basement. They shrugged it off, assuming it was just the old pipes settling in the house. As the weeks passed, strange things began to happen. Objects would move on their own, doors would open and close by themselves, and the couple would hear strange noises in the middle of the night. They were convinced their house was haunted. One day, Jack decided to investigate the strange noises in the basement. As he descended the stairs, he noticed that the basement was much bigger than he had thought. He saw a door at the far end of the basement that he had never noticed before. Curiosity got the best of him, and he opened the door. Inside, he found a room that looked like a child's bedroom, complete with a small bed, toys, and books. Jack was confused because they didn't have any children, and the previous owners had never mentioned anything about a hidden room. As he inspected the room, he found a journal lying on the bed. He opened it and started to read. The entries were from a young girl named Lily, who had lived in the house years ago. She wrote about her parents' fights and how she felt scared and alone. The entries became more and more disturbing, and Jack felt sick to his stomach. Suddenly, he heard Emily screaming from upstairs. He ran to her and found her holding a picture of Lily. Emily told Jack that she had seen the same girl in their house, watching them from a distance. As they were trying to make sense of everything, the doorbell rang. It was a woman who introduced herself as Lily's mother. She explained that her daughter had passed away in the house years ago and that she had kept Lily's room untouched as a tribute to her. The couple was shocked to learn the truth about their house and the mysterious girl they had seen. However, the real shock came when they realized that Lily's spirit had attached itself to Emily, who had unknowingly opened the door to her room. Emily was possessed by Lily's spirit and was now trapped in the house forever. Jack was left alone, haunted by the memories of his lost love and the ghostly presence that he could feel lurking in the shadows. There was a young woman named Sarah who lived alone in a small apartment. One night, She heard strange noises coming from the closet in her bedroom. She was too scared to investigate, so she just tried to ignore it and went to bed. The next morning, she found her closet door wide open and her clothes were all over the floor. She thought someone must have broken in, so she called the police. When they arrived, they searched the apartment but didn't find any signs of forced entry or any other clues. Sarah was shaken but eventually brushed it off as her imagination. However, the strange noises continued every night, and the closet door would always be open in the morning. She tried to find logical explanations but couldn't. She began to lose sleep and became paranoid. One night, she decided to confront whatever was in the closet. She slowly opened the door and saw a pair of glowing eyes staring back at her. She screamed and ran out of the apartment. The police returned and searched the closet, but all they found was a stray cat that had somehow gotten in. Sarah was relieved and decided to keep the cat. However, as the days passed, strange things began to happen. The cat would disappear for hours and come back covered in dirt and blood. Sarah noticed scratches on her walls and furniture that looked like they were made by a human hand. One night, Sarah heard the same strange noises again, but this time, they were louder and more intense. She got up to check the closet and found the cat had somehow transformed into a demon. The demon attacked her, but she managed to escape and run out of the apartment. As she stood outside, she saw that her apartment building was actually a mental institution, and she was a patient there. She had been hallucinating everything and had never even owned a cat. The demon was just a figment of her imagination. Shocked and scared, Sarah realized that she had been living in her own delusion for years and that everything she had ever known was a lie. It was a stormy night, and Sarah was driving home from a late shift at work. The rain was pouring down in sheets, making it hard to see the road ahead. She was almost home when she noticed a figure standing in the middle of the road, soaked to the bone. She slammed on the brakes, narrowly avoiding hitting the figure. As she rolled down her window, she could see that it was a young woman, shivering in the rain. Sarah felt sorry for her and offered to give her a ride home. The woman gratefully accepted, and Sarah helped her into the car. As they drove, the woman told Sarah her story. She had been out for a walk when the storm hit, and she had gotten lost. She didn't have a phone or any way to contact her family, and she was stranded in the middle of nowhere. Feeling sorry for her, Sarah offered to let her stay the night at her place until the storm passed. The woman gratefully accepted, and they drove on towards Sarah's house. As they pulled up to Sarah's driveway, the woman suddenly lunged at her, revealing the shocking twist. She was a serial killer who had been preying on unsuspecting victims during the storm. Sarah fought for her life, but it was too late. She had fallen into the woman's trap, and now she was just another victim of the killer's twisted game. In the end, the storm passed, and the sun rose once again. But for Sarah, it was too late. She had trusted the wrong person, and now she paid the ultimate price. It was a hot summer night, and Mia was home alone. Her parents had gone out of town for the weekend, leaving her to look after the house. She was excited to have some time to herself, and she decided to make the most of it by having a movie marathon in the living room. As she settled in to watch her favorite horror movies, she heard a strange noise coming from upstairs. She paused the movie and listened carefully, but the noise had stopped. She shrugged it off as her imagination and pressed play again. But just as the movie reached its climax, she heard the noise again, louder this time. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the hallway outside her bedroom. Panic set in as she realized that she was not alone in the house. She tried to call the police, but her phone was dead, and she had left her charger upstairs. With no other options, Mia grabbed a kitchen knife and slowly made her way up the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest. She reached the top of the stairs and turned the corner, ready to face whatever was waiting for her. But as she stepped into her bedroom, she realized a shocking twist. The intruder was not a stranger, but her long-lost twin sister, who had been separated from her at birth. Her sister had always been jealous of her perfect life, and she had finally snapped, intending to take over Mia's identity and life. Mia was shocked and horrified by the betrayal, but she knew she had to act fast if she wanted to survive. She lunged at her sister with the knife, fighting for her life. In the end, Mia emerged victorious, but the scars of that night would stay with her forever. She had learned the hard way that sometimes, the people we trust the most can be the ones who want to hurt us the most. It was a bright and sunny day, and Rachel was out for a walk in the park. As she strolled through the woods, she noticed a small cabin hidden among the trees. Curious, she decided to investigate. As she approached the cabin, she heard a strange noise coming from inside, a soft whispering sound, like someone talking to themselves. She pushed open the door and stepped inside, but the cabin was empty. Confused, Rachel turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind her, trapping her inside. Panic set in as she realized that she was locked in the cabin with no way out. As she searched for a way to escape, she noticed something strange about the walls. They were covered in strange symbols and markings, and she couldn't help but feel that they held some dark meaning. Just as she was about to give up hope, she noticed a small door hidden behind a bookshelf. She pulled it open, revealing a hidden room filled with strange artifacts and ancient relics. As she explored the room, she found a small book bound in leather, covered in the same symbols as the walls. Curiosity got the best of her, and she opened the book, hoping to uncover its secrets. But as she began to read, she realized a shocking twist. The book was cursed, and by opening it, she had unleashed a powerful evil into the world. The cabin was not just a forgotten hideaway in the woods, but a place of unspeakable horror, and now she was trapped inside with it. As the darkness closed in around her, Rachel knew that she would never leave the cabin alive, and she could only hope that others would heed her warning and stay far away from the cursed place in the woods. It was a dark and stormy night, and Sarah was driving home from work. She had taken a shortcut through the woods, hoping to avoid the heavy traffic on the highway. As she drove, she noticed a hitchhiker standing by the side of the road, his thumb outstretched. Feeling sorry for the man standing in the rain, she stopped her car and offered him a ride. The man climbed into the back seat and thanked her for her kindness. As they drove, Sarah noticed that the hitchhiker was silent, never speaking a word. She thought it was a bit strange, but she brushed it off, assuming that the man was simply tired or shy. But as they neared her house, Sarah began to feel uneasy. The hitchhiker's silence was becoming more and more unnerving, and she started to wonder if she had made a mistake by picking him up. Just as she pulled into her driveway, the hitchhiker spoke for the first time, his voice low and menacing. "Thanks for the ride," he said, before pulling out a knife and lunging at her. Sarah screamed and tried to fight back, but it was too late. The hitchhiker had already stabbed her, leaving her bleeding and alone in the darkness. As Sarah lay dying, she realized a shocking twist. The hitchhiker was not a stranger at all, but a long-lost cousin who had been declared dead years ago. He had been waiting for his chance to seek revenge on the family who had betrayed him, and Sarah's kindness had been his opportunity to strike. Sarah's death was a tragic reminder that sometimes, The people we think we know best can be hiding dark secrets and dangerous intentions. Jenny had just moved into her new apartment, but there was something strange about the place. Every night, she heard strange noises coming from the closet in her bedroom. It sounded like someone was whispering, and she could hear the faint sound of breathing. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, but the noises continued every night, growing louder and more persistent. She tried to ignore them, but they began to haunt her dreams, and she found herself waking up in the middle of the night, covered in sweat. One night, she couldn't take it anymore, and she decided to investigate the closet. She slowly opened the door, her heart racing with fear, but she saw nothing out of the ordinary. Just as she was about to close the door, she saw movement out of the corner of her eye. She turned her head and saw a pair of glowing eyes staring back at her from the darkness of the closet. Jenny screamed and tried to run, but something grabbed her ankle, pulling her back into the closet. She fell to the ground, hitting her head on the hardwood floor. When she woke up, she was in a hospital room, surrounded by doctors and nurses. They told her that she had been found unconscious in her apartment, with no memory of what had happened. As she tried to piece together what had happened, she realized the shocking twist. The noises she had heard in her closet were not from a ghost or a monster, but from a person who had been hiding in her closet the whole time. The person had been living in her apartment, watching her every move, waiting for the right moment to strike. Jenny was lucky to have survived the encounter, but she would never forget the terror of knowing that someone had been watching her every move, hidden in the darkness of her closet. Emily had always been a curious person, and she loved exploring abandoned places. So when she heard about the old, abandoned hospital on the edge of town, she knew she had to check it out. One night, she snuck into the hospital, making her way through the dark hallways and empty rooms. She felt a rush of excitement as she explored the deserted hospital, the moon casting eerie shadows across the empty walls. As she reached the center of the hospital, she heard a strange noise coming from one of the rooms. It sounded like someone was whimpering. Emily followed the sound to a small room at the end of the hallway, where she saw a figure lying on a bed, its face hidden by a hooded sweatshirt. Emily approached the figure, asking if they needed help. But as she drew closer, she realized that something was off. The figure wasn't moving, and its hands were too still to be human. Suddenly, the figure sat up, and Emily saw that it wasn't a person at all. It was a life-sized doll, with cold, glassy eyes that seemed to follow her every move. Emily screamed and turned to run, but she was too late. The hospital had been abandoned for a reason, and she had triggered a trap set by the twisted mind of its previous owner. Emily had unknowingly activated a switch that set off a chain reaction of deadly traps, and she was trapped in the hospital with no way out. The shocking twist was that the whimpering figure was actually a doll, and the real danger was the deadly traps that the previous owner had left behind to trap unsuspecting trespassers. Emily had unknowingly walked into a death trap, and her love of adventure had led her to her doom. Mark had always been fascinated by the legend of the haunted cabin in the woods. The cabin had been abandoned for years, and there were rumors that it was haunted by the ghost of a young girl who had died there. One summer night, Mark and his friends decided to camp out in front of the cabin. They built a campfire and told scary stories, trying to scare each other into believing in the ghost. As the night wore on, they heard strange noises coming from inside the cabin. They heard footsteps, whispers, and even a child's laughter. Mark's friends were too scared to investigate, but Mark felt brave enough to check it out. He entered the cabin and made his way to the source of the noises. In the corner of the room, he saw a figure sitting on the floor, holding a teddy bear. The figure was a young girl, around 10 years old, with long blonde hair and a sad expression. Mark approached the girl, asking if she needed help. But as he drew closer, he realized that something was off. The girl's eyes were too still, and her skin was too pale. Suddenly, the girl's head snapped back, revealing a row of sharp teeth and a terrifying smile. Mark turned to run, but it was too late. The legend of the haunted cabin was true, and the ghost had lured him into her trap. He was trapped in the cabin with the ghost, with no way out. The shocking twist was that the ghost was not a ghost at all, but a demon who had taken on the form of the young girl to lure unsuspecting victims into her trap. Mark had fallen for the demon's trick, and he was now trapped in the cabin with no hope of escape. Sophie had always been an adventurous soul. She loved exploring abandoned places and uncovering hidden secrets. So when she heard about the old, abandoned amusement park on the edge of town, she knew she had to check it out. One night, she snuck into the amusement park, climbing over the fence and making her way through the empty rides and attractions. She felt a rush of excitement as she explored the deserted park, the moon casting eerie shadows across the empty pathways. As she reached the center of the park, she heard a strange noise coming from one of the rides. It sounded like someone was crying. Sophie followed the sound to the old Ferris wheel, where she saw a figure sitting in one of the seats, its face hidden by a hooded sweatshirt. Sophie approached the figure, asking if they needed help. But as she drew closer, she realized that something was off. The figure wasn't moving, and its hands were too still to be human. Suddenly, the figure looked up, and Sophie saw that it wasn't a person at all. It was a life-sized doll, with cold, glassy eyes that seemed to follow her every move. Sophie screamed and turned to run, but she was too late. The amusement park had been abandoned for a reason, and she had triggered a trap set by the twisted mind of its previous owner. Sophie had unknowingly activated a switch that set off a chain reaction of deadly traps, and she was trapped in the amusement park with no way out. The shocking twist was that the crying figure was actually a doll, and the real danger was the deadly traps that the previous owner had left behind to trap unsuspecting trespassers. Sophie had unknowingly walked into a death trap, and her love of adventure had led her to her doom. It was a dark and stormy night, and Lily was driving home from her late shift at the diner. As she drove down the winding, deserted road, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She turned up the radio to distract herself, but the static only added to her unease. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the middle of the road, causing Lily to slam on the brakes. The figure was a woman, soaked to the bone and shivering. Lily rolled down her window and asked if she needed help. The woman said that her car had broken down a few miles back and she had been walking for hours. She begged Lily for a ride home, and feeling sympathetic, Lily agreed. As they drove, the woman talked about her life and how she had just left her abusive husband. Lily listened intently, feeling a sense of sisterhood with the stranger. When they arrived at the woman's house, Lily offered to help her bring in her bags. As they walked up to the door, the woman turned to Lily and said, "Thank you so much for your kindness. You're the first person who has helped me in a long time." Just then, the lights flickered on, and Lily saw the woman's husband standing in the living room, holding a knife. The woman had lured Lily to her house as part of a twisted plan to get revenge on her abusive husband. In the end, the woman and her husband murdered Lily, leaving her body buried in the woods. The shocking twist was that the woman wasn't the victim, but rather the predator, using Lily's kindness to further her own deadly plan. Emma and her friends had always been fascinated by the old abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town. The mansion had been abandoned for years, and there were rumors that it was haunted by the ghosts of the family who used to live there. One Halloween night, Emma and her friends decided to explore the mansion. They snuck into the old, creaky house and made their way up to the attic. As they walked around, they felt a chill in the air and heard strange whispers coming from the shadows. Suddenly, they heard a loud thump, followed by a blood-curdling scream. Emma's friends ran for the door, but Emma stayed behind to investigate. She followed the sound to a small room in the corner of the attic. As she approached the room, she saw a shadowy figure standing in the doorway. Emma froze, too scared to move. The figure beckoned her forward, and Emma felt a strange compulsion to obey. When she stepped into the room, she saw a figure lying on the bed, covered in blood. The figure turned its head and revealed itself to be Emma's own mother, who had been missing for months. Emma was shocked and horrified. She had no idea how her mother had ended up in the abandoned mansion, or who had hurt her. But as she turned to leave, she saw a reflection in the mirror. It was herself, covered in blood and holding a knife. The shocking twist was that Emma had been the one who had hurt her mother and hidden her in the mansion. Emma had been struggling with mental illness and had blacked out the night she had attacked her mother. The mansion had triggered her memories, and she had been lured into the room where she had committed the crime. Jenna was a college student who loved to explore abandoned places. She had heard about an old factory on the outskirts of town that had been closed for years, and she decided to check it out. She packed her backpack with a flashlight, a camera, and some snacks, and she set out on her adventure. As she approached the factory, she noticed that there was a strange smell in the air, a mix of chemicals and something else, something rotten. Jenna didn't let the smell deter her, and she made her way inside the factory. She explored the dark and dusty corridors, taking pictures and making notes of what she saw. But then something even more terrifying happened. She heard footsteps coming from the other end of the hallway. She turned off her flashlight and hid, but the footsteps grew louder and closer. Jenna was frozen with fear, but then something even more shocking happened. The person who emerged from the darkness was not a monster or a killer, but a man in a hazmat suit. The man explained that the factory had been a chemical plant, and that it had been closed down because of a toxic spill that had contaminated the entire area. He warned Jenna that she was in danger, that the air she was breathing was poisonous and that she needed to leave immediately. Jenna was shocked and scared, but then something even more shocking happened. The man in the hazmat suit revealed that he was not a worker or a scientist, but a ghost, a victim of the toxic spill who had never been able to leave the factory. He explained that he had been trapped there for years, watching as the factory fell into ruin and as people like Jenna came to explore it. He begged Jenna to help him find a way out, to break the curse that kept him and the other ghosts bound to that place. Jenna was moved by the ghost's plea, and she vowed to do everything she could to help him. She realized that the factory was not just an abandoned building, but a place full of tragic history and unresolved spirits. She left the factory with a newfound appreciation for the power of the supernatural and a determination to help those who were trapped in between worlds. Maggie had always been a fan of true crime stories. She loved reading about serial killers and psychopaths, and she often wondered what it would be like to meet one in person. One day, while on vacation in a small town, Maggie met a man named Richard. He was charming and friendly, and they struck up a conversation in a local coffee shop. As they talked, Maggie couldn't help but notice that Richard seemed to know a lot about serial killers. He could name all the famous ones, and he seemed to have a deep understanding of their motivations and methods. Maggie was intrigued, and she asked Richard if he had ever met a serial killer in person. He hesitated for a moment, then he said that he had. Richard told Maggie that he had once been a prison guard at a high-security prison. He had met many notorious killers and had even formed a bond with some of them. Maggie was fascinated, and she asked Richard to tell her more. But then something even more terrifying happened. Richard's demeanor changed, and his eyes became cold and calculating. He told Maggie that he had not just met serial killers, but that he had become one. He explained that he had always been fascinated by their minds, and that he had studied them for years. And then he had started to emulate them, to kill in their style and leave clues for the police to find. Maggie was frozen with fear, but then something even more shocking happened. Richard revealed that he had brought her to the town for a reason. He had chosen her to be his next victim, to be the subject of his ultimate crime. Maggie was trapped, with no way out. But then she realized that she had a chance to fight back. She used her knowledge of true crime stories to outsmart Richard, to play on his obsession with serial killers and to turn his own methods against him. In the end, Maggie was able to escape and to bring Richard to justice. She realized that the fascination with true crime was not just a morbid curiosity, but a tool for survival and empowerment. Sarah and her friends had always been fascinated by the abandoned asylum on the outskirts of town. They had heard stories of the horrible things that had happened there, and they had always wanted to explore it. One night, they decided to sneak into the asylum and see what they could find. They brought flashlights and cameras, and they were determined to document their adventure. As they entered the asylum, they heard strange noises and whispers in the darkness. They were scared, but they kept going, exploring the creepy hallways and rooms. But then something even more terrifying happened. They heard footsteps coming from the other end of the hallway. They turned off their flashlights and hid, but the footsteps grew louder and closer. Sarah and her friends were frozen with fear, but then something even more shocking happened. The person who emerged from the darkness was not a monster or a ghost, but a man in a security guard uniform. The security guard explained that he had been assigned to watch over the asylum, to prevent people from sneaking in and getting hurt. He warned Sarah and her friends that the asylum was not safe, and that they should leave immediately. Sarah and her friends were ashamed and embarrassed, but then something even more shocking happened. The security guard revealed that he had been a patient at the asylum many years ago. He had been wrongly accused of a crime and locked up, and he had suffered in that place for years. He explained that the asylum had been a terrible place, full of abuse and neglect. But he had found a way to survive, to hold on to his sanity and his humanity. He had learned to find joy in small things, to appreciate the beauty in the world around him, and to never lose hope. Sarah and her friends were shocked and moved by the security guard's story. They realized that the asylum was not just a creepy place full of ghosts and monsters, but a place full of human suffering and resilience. They left the asylum with a newfound respect for the power of the human spirit, and a determination to fight against injustice and cruelty in the world. Anna was a college student who had just moved into a new dorm room. She was excited to start her new life, but there was something strange about her room. Whenever she tried to sleep, she would hear strange whispers in the darkness. One night, as she was lying in bed, the whispers grew louder and more distinct. She could make out words and phrases, but they didn't make any sense. They seemed to be coming from the walls themselves. Anna was scared, but she tried to ignore the whispers and go to sleep. But then something even more terrifying happened. The walls started to move, as if they were alive. They twisted and turned, and strange patterns appeared on their surface. Anna was frozen with fear, but then the patterns started to form a shape. It was the shape of a woman, with long black hair and an eerie smile. The woman started to move, and Anna realized that she was a ghost. The ghost spoke to Anna, telling her that she had been murdered in that very room many years ago. She had been a college student just like Anna, but she had fallen in love with the wrong man, a dangerous man who had killed her in a fit of rage. Anna was shocked and scared, but then something even more shocking happened. The ghost asked Anna to help her find her killer. She explained that she had been stuck in that room for years, unable to move on until her killer was brought to justice. Anna was hesitant at first, but she knew that she had to help the ghost. Together, they worked to uncover the identity of the killer and bring him to justice. In the end, the killer was caught, and the ghost was able to move on. Anna realized that sometimes the things we fear the most are actually there to help us, and that there is always a way to find justice, even in the afterlife. Emily was a young woman who had just moved into a new apartment. She loved the place, but there was something strange about it. She would hear strange noises in the middle of the night, and sometimes she felt like she was being watched. One night, as she was getting ready for bed, she heard a loud banging on the front door. She was scared, but she went to check who it was. As she opened the door, a man entered her apartment, holding a knife. The man was tall and muscular, and he looked like he was on drugs. He demanded that Emily give him all her money, but she didn't have any. She begged him to leave, but he refused and started to approach her with a knife. As he was about to attack her, Emily noticed something strange. The man's face started to twist and contort, and his body transformed into that of a monster. His eyes turned red, and he grew sharp teeth and claws. Emily was frozen with fear, but then something even more shocking happened. The monster started to talk to her, revealing that he wasn't there to hurt her. He was actually a protector, sent to watch over her and keep her safe. Emily didn't believe him at first, but then she realized that the strange noises and feelings of being watched were actually the monster watching over her. He had been hiding in plain sight, protecting her from harm. The monster explained that he had been watching over her for years, waiting for the right time to reveal himself. He had been sent by a secret organization to protect her from a dangerous criminal who was after her. Emily was shocked and scared, but she knew that she had to trust the monster. Together, they worked to uncover the identity of the criminal and bring him to justice. In the end, the criminal was caught, and Emily was safe. She realized that sometimes the things we fear the most are actually there to protect us, and that the world is full of mysteries that we can't explain. In a small town, there was an old house that had been abandoned for years. The locals believed that it was haunted, and many had claimed to see strange things happening inside. One day, a group of teenagers decided to explore the house and see if the rumors were true. As they entered the house, they felt a chill run down their spines. The air was thick with dust, and the floorboards creaked under their feet. As they explored the rooms, they found nothing out of the ordinary. But as they were about to leave, they noticed a locked door in the back of the house. They decided to investigate and broke the lock, revealing a hidden staircase leading to a basement. As they descended the stairs, they heard strange noises and saw shadows moving in the darkness. They were scared, but their curiosity got the best of them, and they continued down the stairs. When they reached the bottom, they saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was a woman, dressed in a white gown, with long black hair covering her face. She was standing in front of an old mirror, staring at her reflection. The teenagers were terrified and tried to leave, but the door was locked from the outside. The woman turned to face them, and they saw that her eyes were pitch black. Suddenly, she started to scream, and the room shook with an intense force. The teenagers thought they were going to die, but then something strange happened. The woman's body began to twist and contort, and her face transformed into that of an old man. The old man introduced himself as the owner of the house, who had been disguising himself as the woman to scare away any potential intruders. He explained that he had been living in the basement, hidden from the outside world, for years. The teenagers were shocked and scared, but they knew that they had to leave the house and call the police. As they fled, they heard the old man laughing maniacally, promising that they would never be able to leave the house alive. When the police arrived, they discovered that the old man had been a serial killer, responsible for the disappearances of dozens of people over the years. He had been using the abandoned house as his lair, hiding in plain sight and scaring away anyone who came close. The teenagers had narrowly escaped becoming his next victims, and they realized that the old house wasn't haunted, but rather, it was a trap. In a small, isolated village, there was a legend of a creature that lived in the nearby forest. The villagers warned their children never to venture into the woods alone, or they risked being taken by the creature. One day, a young girl named Anna decided to explore the forest on her own. She was convinced that the creature was just a myth, and she wanted to prove to the villagers that they were wrong. As she wandered deeper into the forest, she heard a rustling in the bushes. Suddenly, a hand reached out and grabbed her. She screamed and struggled, but the creature was too strong. It dragged her deeper into the woods, and Anna knew that she was going to die. But then, something strange happened. The creature stopped and released her. It revealed itself to be a young boy, not much older than Anna herself. He explained that he had been cursed by a witch and turned into a monster. He had been living in the forest, alone and afraid, until he met Anna. The two of them quickly became friends and spent the day playing in the woods. Anna promised to help the boy find a way to break the curse and return him to his human form. As they returned to the village, the boy revealed another shocking secret. He wasn't the only one who had been cursed. There were others, living in the forest, afraid to come out and reveal themselves to the villagers. Anna knew that she had to help them, and with the boy's guidance, she worked tirelessly to find a way to break the curse. Eventually, they discovered a potion that could break the curse, and they set out to free the cursed children. When they returned to the villagers were shocked to see the once monstrous children return to their human forms. They were grateful to Anna and the boy for their bravery and kindness. Anna realized that the real monsters weren't the cursed children living in the forest, but the villagers who had spread fear and mistrust for generations. She and the boy became heroes, bringing the village together and ending the cycle of fear and hatred. In a quiet neighborhood, there was a house that everyone avoided. The house had been abandoned for years, and strange things had been reported happening inside. One day, a group of friends decided to investigate the house and see if the rumors were true. As they entered the house, they felt an eerie sense of foreboding. The air was thick with dust and cobwebs, and the floorboards creaked under their feet. They explored the rooms cautiously, but found nothing out of the ordinary. Just as they were about to leave, they heard a noise coming from the basement. Curiosity got the best of them, and they decided to investigate. As they descended the stairs, they saw a figure in the shadows. It was a man, dressed in a tattered suit and holding a suitcase. The man stared at them with dark, hollow eyes, and then vanished into thin air. The friends were shocked and terrified. convinced that they had seen a ghost. As they fled the house, one of them noticed something strange. The suitcase that the man had been carrying was left behind on the stairs. They opened it, and to their horror, they found it filled with stacks of cash and jewelry. Suddenly, everything made sense. The man wasn't a ghost, but a living person who had been using the abandoned house as a hiding place for his illegal activities. He had been scared off by the unexpected visitors, leaving behind his valuable loot. The friends were faced with a dilemma. Should they turn in the suitcase to the police and risk getting caught up in the criminal underworld, or keep the loot for themselves and risk the wrath of the man who owned it? They knew that either way, their lives would never be the same again. In a small town surrounded by dense forests, there was a legend of a creature that lived in the woods. The creature was said to be a shapeshifter, taking on the form of whatever its prey feared the most. It preyed on those who dared to venture into the forest alone. One day, a group of teenagers decided to go camping in the forest, disregarding the warnings of the townspeople. They set up their tents near a creek and settled in for the night. As they sat around the campfire, telling ghost stories and roasting marshmallows, they heard a rustling in the bushes. Suddenly, one of them disappeared, and the others panicked. They searched frantically for their friend, but he was nowhere to be found. The group huddled together, too scared to sleep, and waited for morning. When the sun rose, they discovered their missing friend's torn and mangled body. The creature had struck again. As they mourned their loss and planned their escape from the forest, one of the teenagers noticed something strange. The creature's footprints were different than they had been the night before. Upon closer inspection, they realized that the creature wasn't a shapeshifter at all. It was one of their own. The creature was a member of their group who had been secretly plotting to kill the others for the past few weeks. He had disguised himself as the creature to cover up his crimes and to instill fear in the others, making them easier targets. The remaining teenagers were stunned and horrified as they realized that the true monster had been living among them all along. They had nowhere to run, trapped in the forest with a killer in their midst. Once upon a time, in a small town, there was a house on the outskirts that everyone claimed was haunted. No one had lived in it for years, and the townspeople whispered about strange noises and eerie lights that flickered in the windows at night. One day, a young couple decided to move into the house. They brushed off the rumors, thinking that the townspeople were just superstitious. They soon realized, however, that they were wrong. On their first night in the house, they heard a loud banging coming from the basement. They went to investigate but found nothing. As they went back upstairs, they heard footsteps following them. They turned around, but again, nothing was there. The strange occurrences continued, each night getting worse and more terrifying. The couple tried to leave the house, but the doors wouldn't open, and the windows were sealed shut. One night, they woke up to find themselves tied up in the basement. An old man appeared before them, cackling, and told them that he had trapped them in the house forever. He revealed that he had been haunting the house for years, waiting for someone foolish enough to move in so that he could trap them. The couple was terrified, but then they noticed something strange. The old man's reflection in the basement window showed that he was actually a ghost. They quickly realized that they, too, were ghosts and had been dead all along. The old man had just been playing with them, trapping them in the illusion of a haunted house. The couple's screams echoed through the empty house, but no one could hear them. They were trapped in the ghostly realm forever, prisoners of their own disbelief in the supernatural. Jake had always been drawn to the mysterious forest at the edge of town. The locals said that it was cursed, that anyone who entered never came out alive. But Jake was determined to uncover the truth. As he wandered deeper into the forest, he could feel the weight of history bearing down on him. The trees towered above him, and the only sound was the soft rustle of leaves under his feet. But as Jake stepped deeper into the forest, he knew that he had made a grave mistake. The trees seemed to close in around him, and the air grew thick with the stench of decay. Suddenly, he heard a soft whisper in the distance. It grew louder as he approached a clearing, and he could make out the words, "Turn back, before it's too late." Jake tried to run, but the forest seemed to go on forever. Every step he took was harder than the last, and the whispering grew louder and more urgent. Just when all seemed lost, Jake stumbled across an old cabin in the woods. It was filled with ancient artifacts, and he found a mysterious book that he knew was the key to escaping the cursed forest. Jake opened the book, and suddenly, the forest began to shake. The trees cracked and crumbled, and the ground gave way beneath his feet. Jake found himself tumbling down into a dark, endless abyss. He fell for what seemed like an eternity, until he landed in a pool of icy water. When he looked up, he saw a figure looming over him. It was the spirit of the cursed forest, and its eyes burned with an otherworldly fire. But Jake was not afraid. He knew that he had faced his fears and emerged victorious. With a final burst of strength, he swam to the surface and emerged from the water, victorious over the curse of the mysterious forest. Amy had always been fascinated by the old abandoned house on the hill. The locals said that it was cursed, that anyone who entered never came out alive. But Amy was determined to uncover the truth. As she climbed the stairs to the front door, she could feel the weight of history bearing down on her. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the only sound was the soft echo of her footsteps. But as Amy stepped inside, she knew that she had made a grave mistake. The door slammed shut behind her, and the room was plunged into darkness. Suddenly, she heard a soft whisper in the distance. It grew louder as she approached the stairs, and she could make out the words, "Get out, before it's too late." Amy tried to run, but the stairs seemed to go on forever. Every step she took was harder than the last, and the whispering grew louder and more urgent. Just when all seemed lost, Amy stumbled across a room filled with ancient artifacts. She found a mysterious amulet, and she knew that it was the key to escaping the cursed house. Amy put on the amulet, and suddenly, the house began to shake. The walls cracked and crumbled, and the floor gave way beneath her feet. Amy found herself tumbling down into a dark, endless abyss. She fell for what seemed like an eternity, until she landed in a pool of icy water. When she looked up, she saw a figure looming over her. It was the spirit of the cursed house, and its eyes burned with an otherworldly fire. But Amy was not afraid. She knew that she had faced her fears and emerged victorious. With a final burst of strength, she swam to the surface and emerged from the water, victorious over the curse of the old abandoned house on the hill. Emily had always been afraid of the dark. As a child, she would leave the hallway light on all night, too scared to close her eyes and drift off to sleep. As an adult, Emily had learned to manage her fear, but one night, everything changed. She woke up in the middle of the night, and the room was pitch black. She could feel the weight of someone sitting on the edge of her bed. Emily tried to scream, but she couldn't make a sound. She could feel the figure leaning over her, their hot breath on her face. She could smell the stench of decay, and the touch of their cold fingers on her skin. Suddenly, the figure disappeared, and Emily was left alone in the dark. She turned on the light, but there was no one there. The next night, Emily woke up again to find the figure sitting on the edge of her bed. This time, she could see their face. It was twisted in pain, with rotting flesh and empty eyes. Emily tried to run, but the figure was too fast. It chased her through the house, its unearthly howls echoing through the halls. Just when all seemed lost, Emily stumbled across a dusty old book in the attic. It was a book of ancient spells, and she knew what she had to do. Emily recited the spell with trembling hands, and the figure vanished in a burst of light. Emily was left alone in the dark, but she was no longer afraid. She had faced her fears and emerged victorious. From that day on, Emily knew that she would never be afraid of the dark again. But every now and then, she could still feel the presence of the figure, watching her from the shadows. Samantha had always been fascinated by the old abandoned asylum on the outskirts of town. She had heard the stories of the patients who had been mistreated and left to die in their cells, and she was determined to explore the decaying ruins. As she made her way through the dark and shadowy corridors, she could feel the weight of history bearing down on her. The air was thick with the stench of death and decay, and the only sound was the soft echo of her footsteps. But as Samantha turned a corner, she heard a faint whispering in the distance. The voices grew louder as she approached a closed door, and she could make out the words, "Help us." Samantha tried to open the door, but it was locked tight. She could feel the presence of the tortured souls trapped inside, their anguish and pain permeating the air around her. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and Samantha found herself face to face with a group of spirits. They were the patients who had been left to rot in their cells, and their eyes burned with an otherworldly fire. Samantha tried to run, but the spirits were too fast. They chased her through the corridors, their hands reaching out to grab her. Samantha could feel their icy fingers closing around her throat, and she knew that she was going to die. Just when all seemed lost, Samantha found herself back in the main hall of the asylum. She stumbled outside into the bright sunlight, gasping for breath. As she looked back at the asylum, she could see the spirits watching her from the windows. They were still trapped inside, their tortured souls unable to escape the walls that had held them captive for so long. Cassie had always loved the old Victorian house on the hill. She had dreamed of living there ever since she was a little girl, and when she finally got the chance to buy it, she jumped at the opportunity. But as soon as she moved in, strange things began to happen. Objects moved on their own, doors slammed shut, and Cassie could hear the sound of someone walking through the house when she knew she was alone. One night, as she was lying in bed, Cassie heard a soft whisper in her ear. She turned over, but no one was there. She heard the whisper again, and this time she could make out the words, "Get out." Cassie tried to ignore it, but the activity in the house only got worse. She could feel a presence watching her wherever she went, and she knew that she was not alone in the house. One night, as Cassie was getting ready for bed, she saw a figure in the mirror behind her. It was a woman with long, black hair and a pale face. Cassie turned around, but no one was there. The woman in the mirror began to reach out to her, her long fingers curling around Cassie's neck. Cassie tried to scream, but the woman's grip was too strong. When Cassie woke up, she was lying on the floor. She looked around, but the woman was gone. Cassie knew then that she had to leave the house, and she never returned. To this day, the old Victorian house on the hill stands empty, haunted by the spirit of the woman with the long, black hair. Mark had always been a skeptic when it came to the paranormal. But when he moved into his new apartment, strange things began to happen. At first, it was just little things. Objects moved on their own, doors opened and closed by themselves, and a faint whispering could be heard in the dead of night. But soon, the activity escalated. Mark began to see shadowy figures moving in the corners of his eyes, and the whispers grew louder and more menacing. He started to feel a cold breath on the back of his neck, and the feeling of being watched became overwhelming. One night, as Mark was lying in bed, a figure appeared at the foot of his bed. It was a woman with long, tangled hair and a face twisted in pain. She reached out to touch him, and he could feel her icy fingers closing around his throat. Mark tried to scream, but he couldn't make a sound. The woman's grip tightened, and he felt himself slipping away into the darkness. When he woke up, he was in a hospital. The doctors told him that he had been found unconscious in his apartment, with no signs of physical trauma. But Mark knew the truth. He had been visited by a malevolent spirit, and it had nearly taken his life. From that day on, he never stayed in that apartment alone, haunted by the memory of the ghostly figure that had nearly claimed him. Jenna and her friends were excited to spend the weekend camping in the woods. But as the sun began to set, they couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone in the forest. As they sat around the campfire, they heard a sound of rustling leaves and twigs snapping in the distance. Jenna's friend, Jake, went to investigate, but he never returned. Panic set in as they searched for Jake, but all they found was a trail of blood leading deeper into the woods. They followed the trail until they stumbled upon an abandoned cabin hidden in the trees. The cabin was old and decrepit, and the air inside was thick with the stench of death. As they explored the dark and dusty rooms, they found signs of a struggle and heard strange noises coming from the shadows. Suddenly, they heard Jake's voice calling out from the darkness. They followed the sound, but what they found was beyond anything they could have imagined. Jake was lying on the floor, surrounded by a group of creatures that seemed to be part human, part animal. The creatures had glowing eyes and razor-sharp claws, and they were hungry for blood. Jenna and her friends fought back, but the creatures were too powerful. They were outnumbered and outmatched, and one by one, they fell to the creatures' relentless attacks. As Jenna watched her friends being torn apart, she knew that they had stumbled upon something ancient and evil in the woods, something that should have remained hidden and undisturbed. In the end, she was the only one left standing, haunted by the memories of that terrifying night in the cabin in the woods. Oliver had always been fascinated by the old, abandoned asylum on the outskirts of town. The rumors of patients who had been mistreated and left to die within its walls only added to the eerie mystique surrounding the building. One night, Oliver and his friends decided to break into the asylum and explore its dark and twisted halls. As they made their way through the crumbling corridors, they couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Strange noises echoed through the halls, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. As they entered one particularly decrepit wing of the asylum, they found themselves face to face with a figure dressed in rags and covered in scars. The figure lunged at them with a maniacal scream, and Oliver and his friends fled in terror. But the asylum had other plans for them. As they made their way through the labyrinthine corridors, they encountered other patients, some still alive, others long dead and rotting. The walls themselves seemed to shift and twist, leading them deeper into the heart of the asylum. Oliver and his friends could hear the sound of something following them, something with inhuman strength and a thirst for blood. They tried to hide, but the asylum seemed to anticipate their every move. They found themselves trapped in a never-ending maze of madness and horror, with no hope of escape. In the end, Oliver was the only one who made it out of the asylum alive. But he was never the same after that night. He was haunted by the things he had seen and the sounds he had heard within those twisted walls, and he knew that the asylum would always be a part of him, a dark, twisted piece of his soul that he could never escape. Lucy had always been afraid of the old abandoned mine on the outskirts of town. The stories of miners who had perished in the depths of the mine and the eerie whispers that emanated from its dark tunnels had always given her the chills. One day, her curiosity got the best of her, and she decided to explore the mine with her friends. They entered cautiously, the only light coming from their flashlights as they made their way through the narrow passageways. As they went deeper into the mine, the air grew thicker and more oppressive. Lucy felt a sense of unease creeping over her, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. Suddenly, their flashlights flickered and went out, plunging the group into darkness. Panic set in as they tried to find their way out, but the mine seemed to shift and change around them. The walls began to close in, and strange whispers filled the air. Lucy felt something brush past her in the dark, and heard the sound of footsteps echoing through the tunnels. In the distance, they could see a faint glow that seemed to be coming from the end of the tunnel. As they stumbled towards it, the whispers grew louder, and Lucy could hear the sound of something slithering just out of sight. Finally, they emerged from the mine into a large, cavernous room filled with strange, otherworldly creatures. Lucy could barely make out their twisted shapes and glowing eyes in the dim light. As they approached, the creatures began to close in around them, and Lucy realized with horror that they were trapped in the heart of the mine with no hope of escape. The creatures began to close in, their whispers growing louder and more malevolent. Lucy and her friends screamed in terror as the creatures descended upon them, their fate sealed in the depths of the abandoned mine forever. It was a dark and stormy night when Rachel and her friends decided to explore the abandoned mansion at the edge of town. As they crept through the overgrown garden and up the creaky front steps, they couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. Once inside, the group split up to explore different parts of the mansion. Rachel wandered down a dimly lit hallway, a flashlight barely illuminating the peeling wallpaper and musty furniture. As she turned a corner, she suddenly heard a loud crash from upstairs. Heart pounding, Rachel raced up the stairs to find her friends. But as she climbed higher, the air grew colder and her flashlight beam flickered ominously. She could hear strange whispers and laughter echoing through the halls, and felt as though something was watching her every move. Finally, Rachel burst into a large, ornate bedroom, where she found her friends huddled in a corner. They were trembling with fear and pointed to a shadowy figure looming in the corner of the room. As Rachel approached, the figure turned to reveal a twisted, grinning face that seemed to be made of shadow and smoke. Panicking, the group fled down the stairs, only to find that the front door was locked tight. They were trapped in the mansion with the shadowy figure and whatever other horrors lurked within its walls. As they searched for another way out, Rachel and her friends encountered more terrifying creatures, ghostly apparitions, slithering tentacles, and sinister whispers that seemed to come from all directions at once. With each passing moment, the mansion seemed to grow more and more malevolent, its walls closing in around them and its horrors multiplying. In the end, Rachel and her friends never found a way out of the mansion. Their fate remains a mystery to this day, but some say that their spirits still wander its dark halls, trapped forever in a never-ending nightmare of fear and horror. As Lily walked through the forest, she noticed that the trees seemed to be alive. They swayed gently in the breeze, and their leaves rustled like whispers in the wind. But as she reached out to touch one, she felt a jolt of electricity shoot through her hand. Startled, Lily stepped back and looked around. That's when she noticed that the forest was different. The colors were more vivid, the air was charged with energy, and there was a strange aura emanating from everything around her. Suddenly, a figure appeared in front of her. It was a woman, dressed in a long flowing gown and surrounded by a halo of light. She spoke in a voice that was both soothing and commanding. telling Lily that she had been chosen to enter a world beyond her wildest dreams. Without warning, Lily was lifted off the ground and carried deeper into the forest. As she flew through the air, she saw strange and wondrous things, sparkling lakes, towering mountains, and cities made of gold. But as they reached their destination, Lily realized that this was no paradise. She had been brought to a world ruled by a powerful queen, a being of immense power and ancient wisdom. The queen looked at Lily with eyes that seemed to penetrate her very soul, and spoke in a voice that was both gentle and commanding. She told Lily that she had been brought here for a reason, to become the queen's successor, to take on the mantle of power and rule over this strange and wondrous realm. Lily was both awed and terrified. She had always dreamed of adventure and excitement, but she had never imagined something like this. But as she looked into the queen's eyes, she knew that she had been given an opportunity that few mortals had ever been granted. And so, Lily accepted the queen's offer and began her journey into a world of magic, wonder, and danger. She knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but she also knew that she had been chosen for a reason. She had been given the gift of a lifetime, and she was determined to make the most of it. When Maya woke up that morning, she felt different. Her body felt lighter, and her senses seemed more acute. As she got out of bed and walked to the window, she noticed something strange. The world outside was in black and white. At first, Maya thought it was just her eyes playing tricks on her, but as she looked around, she realized that everything was devoid of color. The trees, the buildings, even the sky, it was all in shades of gray. As she made her way to work, Maya felt like she was in a dream. The world around her was eerily quiet, and she could hear every sound, from the rustling of leaves to the distant hum of cars. But it wasn't until she stepped into her office building that things got truly strange. The people around her were frozen in time, like statues. Maya could see their eyes moving and their chests rising and falling, but otherwise, they were completely still. As she made her way to her desk, Maya noticed a small red ball on the floor. She picked it up, and as soon as she did, the world around her exploded into color. The people in the office came back to life, and the sounds of the world rushed back into her ears. Confused and frightened, Maya didn't know what to make of it all. Was she hallucinating? Had she somehow stumbled into an alternate dimension? But as she walked back to her apartment that night, Maya knew that she had been given a glimpse into something greater than herself. She had experienced a world beyond the limitations of the human senses, and she knew that there was more to reality than what she had previously thought. Emily had always been fascinated by the abandoned house at the end of her street. It was old and run down, with boarded-up windows and a roof that looked like it was about to cave in. But there was something about it that drew her in, something that made her want to explore its dark and musty interior. One night, as Emily walked by the house, she noticed that the front door was slightly ajar. Without thinking, she pushed it open and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. Cobwebs hung from every corner, and the floorboards creaked under Emily's feet. But as she walked deeper into the house, she noticed something strange. The walls were covered in strange symbols and sigils, like something out of a horror movie. As she reached the top of the stairs, Emily heard a strange chanting coming from one of the rooms. It was a language she had never heard before, and it sent shivers down her spine. Without warning, the chanting stopped, and a figure appeared at the end of the hallway. It was a woman, dressed in black robes and holding a lit candle. Her face was shrouded in shadow, but Emily could sense a malevolent energy emanating from her. The woman approached Emily, and as she drew closer, Emily realized with a start that she was not alone in the house. There were other figures, lurking in the shadows, watching her every move. As the woman spoke in a voice that sounded like it came from the depths of hell, Emily knew that she had made a terrible mistake. She had stumbled into the midst of a coven of witches, and they had no intention of letting her leave alive. But as she backed away from the woman, Emily felt a strange energy coursing through her veins. It was a power she had never felt before, a power that was ancient and primal. With a surge of strength, Emily called forth the elements and unleashed a torrent of fire, forcing the witches to flee in terror. As the flames consumed the house around her, Emily knew that she had been given a glimpse into a world beyond her wildest imaginings, a world of magic, mystery, and danger. The day started off like any other for Lily. She woke up, got dressed, and headed out to her job at the local coffee shop. But as she walked through the door, she noticed something strange. The entire shop was completely empty, except for one customer sitting in the corner. Lily approached the customer and asked him what he wanted to order, but he didn't respond. He just sat there, staring off into space. As Lily made his coffee, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was not right. The customer seemed almost ethereal, like he wasn't really there at all. Suddenly, the customer turned to Lily and spoke in a voice that sounded like it was coming from far away. "Your world is not what it seems," he said. "There are things beyond your understanding that exist all around you." Lily was taken aback by the strange words, but before she could ask any questions, the customer vanished into thin air. Confused and frightened, Lily tried to continue with her day, but things only grew more bizarre. The coffee machine started spitting out strange symbols instead of coffee, and the cash register began to emit a strange, otherworldly glow. As the day wore on, Lily began to realize that the customer's words were true. Her world was not what it seemed. She was caught in the midst of a supernatural battle that had been raging for centuries, and she was about to become a key player in the struggle. But as she braced herself for the coming storm, Lily knew that she had one advantage. She had seen beyond the veil of reality, and she knew that anything was possible. When Sarah woke up, she found herself in a small room with no windows and a single door. She had no idea how she got there or why she was being held captive, but one thing was clear: she needed to find a way out. As she searched the room, Sarah realized that there was nothing in it except for a small table and a chair. But as she sat down to catch her breath, she noticed something strange. The table seemed to be made of a material she had never seen before, and it was humming with a strange energy. Without warning, the humming grew louder, and Sarah felt a jolt of electricity shoot through her body. She jumped up from the chair, her heart racing with fear. Suddenly, the door to the room creaked open, revealing a man with a sinister grin on his face. He motioned for Sarah to follow him, and she reluctantly complied, knowing that she had no other choice. As they walked down a long corridor, Sarah could hear the sounds of machinery wiring in the distance. She realized with a sickening feeling that she was being taken to some kind of laboratories. But as they entered the lab, Sarah saw something that she could never have imagined in her wildest dreams. There, in the center of the room, was a machine unlike anything she had ever seen before, a machine that seemed to be made of living tissue. As the man strapped Sarah into the machine, she knew that her life would never be the same again. She was about to become part of something much bigger than herself, something that would change the course of human history forever. But as the machine hummed to life, Sarah knew that she was not going to go down without a fight. She would do whatever it took to escape from this nightmare and return to the world she knew, no matter what the cost. As soon as the new family moved into the old Victorian house on the edge of town, strange things started happening. Doors would slam shut on their own, objects would move without explanation, and strange whispers could be heard in the dead of night. The family tried to brush off the strange occurrences as mere coincidences, but as the weeks went by, the activity grew more and more intense. It was as if something was trying to communicate with them, but they couldn't understand its message. One night, as the family was sitting down to dinner, the lights suddenly went out. They fumbled for candles, trying to light them in the darkness, when suddenly they heard a voice. "Get out!" The family froze, staring at each other in terror. The voice had sounded like it was coming from inside the house, but they were alone. As they huddled together in the dark, the family began to realize that the old Victorian house was not just haunted, it was alive. And whatever was living inside it was not happy about their presence. As the night wore on, the family tried to escape the house, but every door and window seemed to be locked tight. They were trapped inside with the malevolent force that seemed to be growing stronger by the minute. In the end, the family would come to understand that they were not living in a haunted house, but a house possessed by a vengeful spirit. And as they fought to survive its wrath, they realized that they were in a battle for their very souls. As Maria walked through the forest, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She had always enjoyed hiking in the woods, but today something felt different. The trees seemed to loom closer together, and the air was thick with a sense of danger. Just as she was about to turn back, Maria spotted a clearing up ahead. As she approached, she saw a group of people gathered around a bonfire. They were chanting in a language she didn't recognize, and their faces were obscured by masks. Maria hesitated, unsure of what to do. But before she could make a decision, one of the figures spotted her and motioned for her to come closer. "Join us," the figure said, holding out a hand. Maria took a step back, her heart racing with fear. But as the chanting grew louder and more insistent, she felt herself being drawn towards the bonfire. She took a tentative step forward, then another, until she was standing among the figures. As they continued to chant, Maria felt a strange energy coursing through her body. It was like nothing she had ever experienced before, a feeling of power and ecstasy that was both exhilarating and terrifying. But as the night wore on, the chanting grew more frenzied, and Maria began to feel like she was losing control. She tried to break free, but the figures held her in a tight grip, their voices rising to a fever pitch. Just as Maria thought she would be consumed by the chaos, the chanting abruptly stopped. The figures removed their masks, revealing their human faces. Maria realized with a start that she knew some of them. They were people from her town, people she had seen every day. As she stumbled away from the bonfire, Maria realized that she had been lured into something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The forest was full of secrets, and she had just stumbled upon one of its darkest mysteries. The old mansion on the hill had always been a source of fascination for the townspeople. It was said to be haunted by the ghost of its former owner, a wealthy recluse who had died under mysterious circumstances. As a dare, a group of teenagers decided to spend the night inside the mansion to see if the rumors were true. They brought sleeping bags and flashlights, and made their way up to the front door. As they entered the mansion, they were immediately struck by the eerie silence that surrounded them. The air was thick with the smell of mold and decay, and the only sound was the creaking of the old floorboards beneath their feet. They set up camp in the living room, trying to make themselves as comfortable as possible. But as the night wore on, strange things began to happen. Doors opened and closed by themselves, and they could hear whispers and footsteps coming from empty rooms. One of the teenagers, a boy named Max, decided to explore the mansion on his own. He made his way up to the second floor, where he found a locked door. Max jiggled the handle, trying to get it open, when suddenly he heard a voice whisper in his ear. "Leave now, while you still can." Max turned around, but there was no one there. He tried to shake off the feeling of unease that had come over him, but as he turned back to the door, he saw something that made his blood run cold. There, etched into the wood of the door, were the words, "I am not dead." Max stumbled backwards in horror, his mind racing with fear and confusion. As he made his way back to the living room, he realized that the mansion was not haunted by a ghost, but by something far more sinister. And as the night wore on, the teenagers would come to understand that they were not alone in the old mansion on the hill. The sun was setting on the small town of Millfield as Joe made his way home from work. He had always enjoyed the peaceful, idyllic life in Millfield, but tonight something felt different. The streets were eerily quiet, and there was a strange sense of foreboding in the air. As he walked, Joe noticed a dark figure standing in the distance, watching him. He couldn't make out who it was, but the figure seemed to be getting closer with each passing moment. Joe quickened his pace, trying to put some distance between himself and the mysterious stranger. But no matter how fast he ran, the figure remained in pursuit. Joe could feel its icy breath on the back of his neck, and he knew that he was in grave danger. Finally, he reached his house and fumbled with his keys, trying to unlock the door. Just as he was about to get inside, the figure caught up to him and grabbed him by the shoulder. Joe turned to face his attacker, ready to defend himself. But when he saw the figure's face, he froze in terror. It was his own reflection, twisted and contorted into a grotesque, demonic form. He tried to scream, but no sound escaped his lips as the figure pulled him into the darkness. Joe realized with horror that he was trapped in a nightmare from which he might never escape. The doorbell rang in the middle of the night, jolting Sarah awake. She stumbled out of bed, still groggy from sleep, and made her way to the front door. As she approached, she could hear faint whispering on the other side. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice trembling with fear. No one answered, but the whispering grew louder. Sarah hesitated for a moment before opening the door. Standing on her porch was a group of people dressed in strange robes, their faces obscured by masks. Sarah took a step back, her heart racing as she tried to make sense of what was happening. "Please, come with us," one of the figures said, holding out a hand. Sarah hesitated, unsure of what to do. But before she could make a decision, the figures pushed past her and into her house. She tried to scream, but no sound escaped her lips as they dragged her towards the basement. Once they reached the basement, Sarah realized with horror that it had been transformed into a dark, eerie temple. Strange symbols and markings covered the walls, and in the center of the room was an altar made of bones. The figures forced Sarah onto the altar and began chanting in a language she didn't recognize. She struggled to break free, but their grip was too strong. As the chanting grew louder and more frenzied, Sarah felt a searing pain in her chest. When the chanting finally stopped, the figures removed their masks, revealing their grotesque, inhuman faces. Sarah realized with a sinking feeling that she had been sacrificed to some ancient, malevolent deity. As she took her last breath, Sarah knew that she had made a grave mistake by opening that door in the middle of the night.